Silence is one of the most powerful tools you will ever carry with you. When you step back from constantly explaining yourself, when you resist the urge to justify, to argue, or to pour out words in order to be understood, you create a space that is charged with energy. That space is what ignites curiosity in the other person. The human mind cannot tolerate a vacuum. It needs something to occupy it. And when you stop filling his ears with explanations, when you stop sending endless messages, when you stop chasing validation through words, he is left in the dark with nothing but questions. That darkness forces him to imagine, and imagination is always stronger than information. What you do not say becomes louder than anything you ever could have spoken. He begins to feel the weight of your silence, and the absence of your voice suddenly becomes the most noticeable presence in his life. Think about it. People get used to your voice, to your patterns, to the way you respond. They start expecting you to explain, to be available, to give them answers before they even finish forming the questions in their minds. But when you interrupt that pattern with silence, you take back control. You remind him that you are not predictable, that you are not desperate to keep the connection alive through endless talking. Instead, you allow the unknown to settle in, and the unknown is always powerful. The unknown is what keeps people awake at night. The unknown is what drives the mind to keep turning, searching, and replaying old conversations. Your silence creates mystery, and mystery is the birthplace of attraction. Mystery has always held power over the human mind. The less someone knows, the more they want to know. The less you reveal, the more valuable the pieces you've already shown become. By being silent, you are no longer the one trying to convince him of your worth. Instead, you allow him to experience the gap your absence creates. That gap becomes like a shadow that follows him, an emptiness that whispers louder than any of your words ever did. He begins to notice that what was once normal, your voice, your laughter, your explanations, is suddenly gone, and in its place is a silence that demands his attention. This silence does not mean weakness. It does not mean defeat. It is not about withholding out of fear. It is about consciously choosing to let the quiet do the speaking for you. In silence, you shift the balance of power. You stop pouring energy outward and start drawing it inward, and he feels that shift even if he cannot explain it. People always feel when the energy changes. When your words stop flowing toward him, he starts to feel the emptiness, and that emptiness begins to echo inside his own mind. It stirs questions like, why isn't she speaking? Why isn't she chasing? What is she thinking? The silence forces him to guess, and in guessing, he can't stop thinking about you. The mind is restless by nature. It hates unanswered questions. When you give him silence, you are giving him the greatest question mark he has faced in your relationship or connection. And that question mark will haunt him until he finds answers. But here's the beauty: you don't have to supply the answers anymore. He will supply them himself, and most of the time, his imagination will make you larger in his mind than you ever were in reality. The silence magnifies your presence instead of diminishing it. It makes your image brighter, your words from the past heavier, and your value more pronounced. Every word you once said takes on new meaning when you stop speaking. Every memory he has of you plays back like a movie because there are no new words to distract him from the old ones. Silence forces him to revisit what was already said, to reinterpret it, to wonder if he missed something. Suddenly, that quiet becomes unbearable because it leaves him alone with his own thoughts about you. That's why silence creates mystery. It leaves him to do the work, to connect the dots, to figure out why you've gone quiet. And in the process, he cannot stop thinking about you. When you explain less, you leave more space for interpretation. When you justify less, you leave more room for imagination. When you speak less, you give more power to your presence. That is why silence is not emptiness. It is fullness disguised. It is not weakness. It is strength controlled. It is not the end of communication. It is communication on a deeper, unspoken level. And in that silence, he feels something he cannot explain. He feels the weight of your absence, the depth of your mystery, and the pull of your presence that lingers even when you say nothing. That is why after silence, he cannot stop thinking about you, because silence is never truly silent. It is a language that speaks directly to the soul. Energy is the language the world listens to before a single word is spoken. Long before your voice reaches someone's ears, your energy has already entered the room, already touched their awareness, already shaped how they respond to you. Words are temporary, they fade, they get lost, they get ignored. But energy leaves a mark that cannot be erased. When you stop speaking, when you choose silence instead of pouring out explanations, your energy doesn't shrink, it expands. He begins to feel something he can't put into words, a presence that lingers in his mind long after you've withdrawn. Silence doesn't weaken your energy, it strengthens it, because it forces him to feel you instead of hear you. When you were constantly available, your energy was diluted. Every message, every call, every explanation scattered pieces of your essence in too many directions. But the moment you step back and become quiet, your energy consolidates. It gathers strength. It becomes denser, more powerful, more noticeable. He begins to feel it pressing against him, even though nothing is being said. That is why people remember silence more vividly than they remember words. Silence has weight, and that weight becomes impossible to ignore. Every human being is sensitive to energy, whether they admit it or not. He can pretend not to notice your absence. He can distract himself. He can even act as though your silence doesn't matter. But energy always betrays the truth. He feels the difference in how the air shifts when you're no longer chasing him with words. He feels the missing rhythm of your voice in his daily life. He feels the calm yet unshakable force of your silence. And that force is magnetic. He doesn't have to understand why it affects him. He only knows that he can't shake it. When your words stop flowing, your energy starts speaking louder. Silence doesn't mean emptiness. It means concentration. Instead of scattering energy through noise, you radiate it through stillness. And stillness amplifies power. Imagine the difference between a stream and a dam. A stream flows constantly, spilling water everywhere, losing its strength. A dam holds water back, builds pressure, and creates enough force to generate electricity. Your silence is that dam. It contains your energy, intensifies it, and makes it impossible for him to ignore. He senses it without understanding it, and the mystery of that energy keeps pulling his thoughts back to you. Energy is not only felt in the present, it echoes in the memory. When you choose silence, he begins to replay your energy in his mind. He remembers the way you looked at him, the way your voice once carried warmth or strength, the way your presence once filled a room. With no new words to cover those memories, they become sharper. The energy you once gave now vibrates louder because silence makes it stand out. It's like hearing a melody after the instrument stopped playing. Suddenly every note becomes more meaningful because it is surrounded by quiet. Your energy becomes the melody that lingers, and he cannot stop listening to it in his mind. What you project in silence is not weakness but control. It is the kind of energy that commands respect without demanding it. People are always drawn to energy they cannot fully decode because mystery creates fascination. By being silent, your energy shifts from predictable to magnetic. Instead of giving him easy access to you through words, you make him feel you in ways he doesn't understand. That confusion makes him think, and the more he thinks, the more your energy takes root in his subconscious. Energy speaks louder than arguments, louder than explanations, louder than demands. It doesn't need proof, it doesn't need evidence, it doesn't need repetition. When you go silent, you stop convincing and start radiating. And that radiation is felt in every layer of his awareness. He might go about his day, he might pretend nothing has changed, but deep down he feels it. Your energy moving through his thoughts, your presence tugging at him like a current beneath the surface. Silence strips away the noise so that all that's left for him to feel is your energy in its purest form. He begins to wonder why he can't stop sensing you. He wonders why he remembers your presence so vividly even without contact. He wonders why your silence feels heavier than your words ever did. And in those questions, he becomes more entangled with you. Because energy doesn't beg, it doesn't chase, it doesn't cry for attention. It simply exists in its stillness. It demands to be felt. That is the power of your silence. It shifts the entire dynamic. It makes him realize that he cannot escape the force of what you carry within you. Your energy speaks louder than anything you could ever say, and it continues to echo in his mind, drawing him back to you, even when you remain completely silent. When silence enters the space between two people, it does something words could never achieve. It forces the mind inward. Without the distraction of constant communication, without the comfort of hearing your explanations or reassurances, he is left alone with himself. And that is often the most uncomfortable place to be. Silence becomes a mirror, and in that mirror he begins to see his choices, his actions, his words reflected back at him. While your presence used to shield him from this level of confrontation, your silence strips away the cover. Suddenly he has no one else to project onto, no one to shift the blame toward, no one to soothe the gaps created by his own behavior. He is left to wrestle with his own reflection, and that reflection begins to ask questions he cannot easily escape. The mind does not like stillness, it wants stimulation. When your voice, your responses, your constant availability are gone, he notices the absence, but more importantly, he starts to notice himself. Silence makes him listen to his own inner dialogue, and that dialogue is not always kind. He replays the things he said, the choices he made, the moments he could have handled differently. He rethinks the times he ignored you, the times he dismissed your value, the times he assumed you would always be there. In the quiet, those moments become louder. They expand in his memory, replaying over and over, creating an echo chamber that only grows more intense because you are not there to drown it out. Reflection is rarely voluntary. Most people run from it. They bury themselves in noise, distractions, conversations, entertainment. anything to avoid sitting alone with their thoughts. But when you choose silence, you give him no option. He has to face the very things he avoided. He has to look at himself through the lens of what your absence reveals. That's when regret begins to whisper, when doubt begins to settle in, when curiosity transforms into a restless need for understanding. He doesn't just think about you. He thinks about himself in relation to you. He wonders why you pulled back, why you stopped speaking, why you no longer respond the way he expects. And in those questions, he confronts not only the reality of losing your words, but the deeper truth of who he has been toward you. This process of self-reflection is not something he would have willingly entered. It is silence that drags him into it. Every unanswered message, every moment without your voice, every day that passes without your presence becomes another reminder that he cannot control the situation. The silence becomes a teacher, showing him where he went wrong, highlighting the things he took for granted, and exposing the weakness of his assumptions. It becomes impossible for him to escape himself, and the more he tries, the more he ends up circling back to you in his thoughts. He begins to recognize the power of your absence in ways he never recognized the power of your presence. When you were available, he didn't have to think. He didn't have to wonder. He didn't have to reflect. But silence removes the comfort and forces awareness. He starts noticing the void you left behind, and in that noticing, he becomes more aware of your significance. The silence speaks to him without words. It says, pay attention, look at what you've done, look at what you've lost, look at what you assumed would always be here, but no longer is. And his mind cannot turn away from those messages because they are not external, they rise up from within him. The most powerful part of silence is not just that it makes him think about you. It makes him think about himself in ways he never did before. It exposes insecurities, triggers doubts, and stirs longings that words could never reach. He may try to distract himself. He may try to fill the void with noise. But when the distractions fade, the silence returns, and so do the questions. Questions about why he feels unsettled. Questions about why you have become heavier in his thoughts. Questions about why the quiet is more unbearable than anything you could have said. Those questions do not leave him. They multiply, and with each one, his reflection deepens. In that state, he begins to understand what silence really does. It holds up a mirror to the soul, and that mirror cannot be broken by denial or ignored by pride. It keeps showing him the same images until he acknowledges them. Every memory of you becomes sharper. Every detail of your presence becomes more vivid. And every mistake he made grows heavier because the silence gives it room to echo. This is why he cannot stop thinking about you after silence, because silence has forced him into a level of self-reflection he would have otherwise avoided. And once the mind has entered that depth, it does not let go easily. Scarcity has always been one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. The less something is available, the more the mind begins to crave it. When you were always there, always accessible, always responding instantly, he did not have to question or value your presence. You were predictable, reliable, almost taken for granted, because the human mind often underestimates what it believes it can never lose. But when you stop being so available, when you step back into silence and pull away your constant presence, everything about you begins to shift in his mind. Suddenly, what was once ordinary becomes rare. What was once expected becomes uncertain. And in that uncertainty, his desire for you intensifies. Scarcity changes perception. Something as simple as water feels common until someone is stranded in the desert. Then it becomes the most valuable treasure. The same principle applies to relationships. When your energy was everywhere, your voice always present, your attention always offered, it felt abundant to him. Abundance often blinds people, making them forget the true worth of what they have. But silence creates scarcity. Your absence reminds him that your presence is not guaranteed, that your voice is not endless, that your attention is not owed to him. And the mind places a higher value on anything it realizes it can lose. It's not just about missing you. It's about realizing that access to you is no longer something he controls. When you remove yourself from the pattern of availability, you break the cycle of expectation. He can no longer assume you'll answer when he calls, that you'll explain when he questions, that you'll reassure him when he doubts. That unpredictability makes him pay attention in a way he never did before. Scarcity awakens urgency. It whispers to him that time and opportunity are running out. And the more he feels that whisper, the more his thoughts revolve around you. The value of anything increases when it becomes harder to reach. Think of diamonds. They are just stones, but their scarcity makes them priceless in human perception. Your silence turns your presence into a diamond, rare, valuable, unforgettable. By no longer being a constant voice in his life, you shift from being easily accessible to being someone he now has to think about, search for, and even chase in his own mind. He starts to wonder where you are, what you're thinking, why you're no longer giving him the abundance of your presence. Those questions create tension, and tension fuels desire. This is why people often remember the one who withdrew more than the one who stayed. The one who stays becomes ordinary. The one who leaves becomes extraordinary. Scarcity doesn't diminish you, it magnifies you. When your presence is no longer flooding his world, every memory of you becomes brighter. Your silence becomes louder. Your absence becomes more noticeable than your words ever were. And the scarcity of your presence makes his mind replay every detail he once overlooked. Scarcity also triggers appreciation. People often need to lose access before they realize the value of what they had. When you stop speaking, he begins to appreciate how much your words once meant. When you stop showing up, he begins to see how much space you once filled. When you stop giving, he begins to feel how much he depended on what you offered. The mind clings to what it fears is slipping away, and in that clinging, he cannot let go of you and his thoughts. Your silence is not emptiness. It is a reminder that your energy is not infinite. You are not a resource to be exploited without end. By creating scarcity, you train his mind to view you differently. You are no longer something he can take for granted. You are something rare, something valuable, something worth attention. And once the mind attaches value to you in this way, it struggles to release it. He becomes more aware of what he lost, more fixated on what he no longer has easy access to, and more restless in trying to fill the gap your silence created. Scarcity transforms perception from entitlement to longing. What he once assumed would always be there is now a question mark in his mind. And the human mind cannot stop thinking about what it perceives as rare and slipping away. That is the reason why silence draws him back, why he cannot ignore you, why you linger in his thoughts. It is because in your absence, you have become scarce, and in scarcity, you have become priceless. Power has never been about how loud your voice is, how many times you can argue your point, or how much effort you put into proving yourself. Real power is quiet, steady, and controlled. When you choose silence instead of reacting, instead of explaining, instead of begging to be seen, you are reclaiming your power in a way that nothing else can. Words can be twisted, they can be ignored, they can be thrown back at you, but silence cannot be challenged. Silence is untouchable. It places you in a position of control without needing to fight for it. The moment you stop reacting, you show that you are no longer giving him the power to control your emotions. And that shift is magnetic. He begins to feel your strength in the absence of words, and that strength keeps pulling at him even when you are nowhere near. When you constantly explain yourself, you hand him your power. You are giving him the authority to validate or reject your words. But silence changes the dynamic. Silence says, I don't need your approval to stand firm in who I am. That unspoken message is more powerful than anything you could explain with words. He realizes that he no longer has the same influence over you, that his actions or opinions do not dictate your response. And that realization unsettles him. The one who does not react is the one who controls the game, because control is not about force, it is about restraint. Restraint is the highest form of strength. Anyone can lash out. Anyone can argue, anyone can spill their emotions everywhere, but it takes discipline and inner confidence to remain quiet, to refuse to be moved by temporary emotions, to hold your ground in silence. That kind of strength radiates a different energy, one that cannot be ignored. He begins to sense that your silence is not weakness, but authority. It is you saying without words, I will not beg for attention. I will not fight to be heard. I will not waste my energy on noise. My silence is my answer, and that answer is final. The reason silence reclaims power is because it disrupts the pattern. If he is used to you arguing, explaining, defending, or justifying, then silence is unexpected, and the unexpected always forces attention. Suddenly, he cannot predict you. He cannot control the outcome. He cannot feed off the energy of your reaction. Silence starves him of the power he once had over you, and in doing so, it recenters the power within you. He starts to wonder what you are thinking, why you are not responding, why you are no longer giving him access to your emotions. That wondering is a sign that the power dynamic has shifted. When you remain silent, you create space for him to face himself. Every time you used to respond, you gave him a way out, a distraction from his own behavior. But silence removes the distraction and leaves him with nothing but his own conscience. He begins to reflect, to question, to feel the weight of what he has done. And the more he thinks, the more he realizes that you are not reacting because you are not under his control anymore. That realization makes you unforgettable in his mind. The quiet strength of your silence makes him see you in a new light, not as someone who can be easily swayed, but as someone who carries a power too steady to be broken. This kind of power is magnetic because it awakens something in him that noise never could: respect. Even if he cannot admit it, even if he tries to ignore it, there is a part of him that recognizes the weight of your silence. He feels the strength in your decision not to respond. He senses the dignity in your choice to rise above arguments. And that quiet authority plants itself in his subconscious. He starts to think about you differently. to remember you differently, to value you differently. Silence doesn't just reclaim your power, it elevates it. By not reacting, you show that your emotions are no longer in his hands. That kind of independence is powerful beyond measure. It sends the message that your peace is not negotiable, that your energy cannot be wasted, that your presence cannot be demanded. The more you hold this position, the more he feels drawn to it. Because people are always pulled towards strength, and silence is strength expressed in its purest form. Your silence becomes the loudest statement in the room, and its echo keeps repeating in his mind long after the moment has passed. He cannot stop thinking about it because he cannot defeat it. Silence reclaims your power in a way nothing else can, and in that power, you become unforgettable. See, the subconscious mind is far more powerful than the conscious mind, and silence is the key that unlocks it. Words often only touch the surface, reaching the conscious level where they can be argued with, dismissed, or forgotten. But silence bypasses the surface and goes straight into the deeper layers of thought where emotions, memories, and impressions lie. That is why silence lingers so heavily. It doesn't just end a conversation, it plants itself in the subconscious where it continues to grow without your effort. When you stop speaking, he is left alone with his own mind, and in that quiet, you become a recurring presence that he cannot escape. Every interaction leaves an imprint, but silence sharpens that imprint. It is like the pause in music that makes the next note unforgettable. The subconscious feeds on contrast, and the contrast between your once present words and your sudden silence makes him relive what you gave before. Every smile, every word, every moment with you takes on a greater weight because nothing new is replacing it. The silence creates a space for memory to expand. He begins to remember details he once overlooked. The tone of your voice, the way you carried yourself, the specific phrases you used, the way your energy felt in the room. Without new noise to drown it out, the subconscious amplifies those memories, replaying them like echoes in his mind. The subconscious is also wired to seek closure, and silence denies closure. When you stop speaking, when you remove yourself without explanation, the subconscious cannot accept the void. It wants answers, it wants understanding, it wants completion. But because you give none, the mind keeps circling, replaying, analyzing, filling in the blanks. This is why he cannot stop thinking about you. Because his subconscious refuses to let go of something unresolved, the silence becomes a puzzle, and the subconscious is addicted to solving puzzles. Even if his conscious mind tries to move forward, his deeper mind drags him back to the last memory of you, the last word you spoke, the last moment you shared. Silence also awakens the subconscious because it creates contrast with noise. The world is filled with endless chatter, text calls, notifications, conversations. People are overstimulated with sound and words every single day. But silence cuts through all of it. It is rare, and rarity makes the subconscious pay attention. When you stop speaking, when you stop feeding the endless noise, your silence becomes louder than words. The subconscious clings to it because it feels different, and the mind always notices what feels different. In that difference, you become significant. What makes silence so powerful in the subconscious is its ability to connect with emotion. Emotions are the language of the subconscious, and silence is deeply emotional. Words can sometimes soften emotions, explain them away, or cover them up. But silence intensifies them. In silence, he feels the weight of missing you more deeply. He feels regret without distraction. He feels curiosity burning stronger. He feels longing rising within him. Because silence makes space for emotion to breathe, the subconscious doesn't just think about you. It feels you. And those feelings become embedded in him. Silence also awakens imagination. And imagination is a product of the subconscious. When you don't speak, he begins to imagine what you might be thinking, what you might be doing, what you might be feeling. That imagination fills the gaps that your silence created, and often the imagined version of you becomes even stronger than the real one. He starts to play scenarios in his head, replaying moments, picturing conversations, building stories. The subconscious does not know the difference between what is real and what is imagined. So every time he imagines you, it reinforces your presence in his mind. Silence creates endless opportunities for the subconscious to invent and replay, which is why you stay with him even when you are absent. Another way silence penetrates the subconscious is through its connection to time. Words are tied to specific moments. They are said and then they pass. But silence stretches across time. Every day that passes without your words makes the silence heavier. It compounds in the subconscious, building more meaning with every hour. The longer the silence lasts, the more significant it feels, and the more he thinks about you. Time does not weaken silence, it strengthens it. It makes the subconscious more restless, more curious, more attached to the memory of you. Silence also shifts the balance of power in the subconscious mind. When you are silent, you are no longer predictable. He cannot rely on your responses to guide his feelings. Instead, he must turn inward, and in doing so, he feels a loss of control. The subconscious hates losing control, and that loss forces him to fixate on the source of it, you. You become the center of his thoughts because your silence makes him feel powerless, and the subconscious cannot ignore what makes it feel powerless. That is why silence penetrates deeper than anything you could ever say. It bypasses logic, bypasses debate, bypasses surface thinking, and goes straight to the subconscious where memory, imagination, and emotion lie. Once something enters the subconscious, it doesn't leave easily. It becomes a loop, a repeated thought, a lingering feeling. And that is why after silence, he cannot stop thinking about you. Because silence has rooted you in the deepest part of his mind, the part that never forgets, the part that replays endlessly, the part that gives you a permanent place in his awareness.